Well, welcome everyone. My name is Barb King. I'm a professor here in the School of Nursing, and I'm the current faculty lead for the DRISS Presents TEACH-Recruitment Science Seminars. This seminar is open to everyone, but it's also part of our Implementation Science Community Health Outcomes certificate as a seminar option. The seminar is hosted every second Friday of the month and always between this noon to 1 timeframe. So we have four speakers, a panel of four that will be presenting today, and I'm going to briefly go through an introduction. Kat Phelps earned her undergraduate degree right here from University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's an alum, and then her doctorate degree in developmental psychology from the University of Texas at Austin. Kat enjoys working on projects that bring together community, wisdom, and research innovation to improve health equity. She feels fortunate to spend her days with people who are passionate about listening, sharing, learning, collaborating, and creatively reimagining health and wellness. I will tell you that Kat didn't put this in her bio, but she is the force behind the Wisconsin Network for Research Support, and really leads a very dynamic research support component within the School of Nursing that is reached across campus and beyond UW-Madison. But she does say that she has a ridiculous sweet tooth and she really loves baking. And too bad she's not in Cooper Hall today because we have heart-shaped donuts in the school. So KJ Hansmann is a physician and has a PhD. Her pronouns are she, they. She became a faculty member in the Department of Family Medicine in 2004, where she serves as a family medicine doctor and a health services researcher. Her research focuses on leveraging our understanding of social determinants of health to design and implement clinical care interventions that promote health equity across the life course. Through postdoctoral research training, after completing her clinical residency in family medicine at University of Wisconsin, she developed skills in multivariable statistical modeling and health equity research and content expertise in driving cessation. Dr. Hansmann's long-term research goal is to investigate and implement interventions that help older adults navigate complex life transitions with their care partners in the context of their social determinants of health. Her current research focuses on decision support interventions that can help older adults with dementia and their care partners navigating transitions to non-driving. Dorona Woods holds a master's degree and is a community research associate with Community Academic Aging Research Network, affectionately known as CARN. Dorona also is engaged with the UW Center for Community Engagement and Health Partnership. Judy Roberts is a member of the Community Advisory Board for the project discussed during the seminar. So I'm going to turn it over to this team to present this content. Really looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Barb. And thanks everyone for joining. I see some familiar names and a lot of people that I'm meeting for the first time. So I'm very excited to share my work at this early stage in my research career, share a little bit about what led me to this, who I've collaborated with, and where we're going from here and the lessons we've learned along the way. So the project that I'm going to be presenting on is a pilot study that I have been working on for almost a year now that was funded through the ICTR Pilot Award Program. It was, at the time I applied for it, it was called the Stakeholder Patient Engaged Research Award. I believe now it's the Patient Engaged Partnership Research Award, or PEPR, which is a more fun acronym to say and helps acknowledge the work that we want to advance forward. So as Barb mentioned in my bio, I am a family medicine doctor by training. And when I finished my clinical training, I felt very overwhelmed, very frustrated with the limits of what we can do in clinical practice to help people with their social determinants of health, knowing that social determinants are such an important part of what actually leads to health and well-being outcomes. And so that led me to training and research, and led me down a pathway where now what I've really focused in on is one specific clinical conversation that comes up again and again where what we're talking about is people's social determinants of health. And what we end up doing is not addressing that in an effective way. And that's this transition to no longer driving that can come up for all kinds of reasons. People are non-drivers for any number of health-related reasons, financial reasons, or just reasons that are best for their family. As a bit of a disclosure, I'll share that I'm a partial non-driver. I live in a 2-adult household, but we share one car. And so every day when I'm thinking about how I'm going to get to work, I have to think about whether I'm getting there with a car or without. And that informs my personal decisions and how I think about this research of how people move around through their communities. So the focus of my pilot study was to engage in essentially a co-creation process, which Kat's going to talk a little bit more later on here about sort of some of the nuance between co-creation and co-design. But I wanted to engage in co-creation at the outset of a long-term project to engage patients with dementia in decisions about their driving. And so to do that, what I wanted to do with this pilot study is twofold. So next slide. I had 2 goals with this study. One part of the study was to conduct interviews with patients with dementia and their family members or friends who are their primary care partners to learn about their opportunities and challenges for discussing transitions to non-driving. I have my experience as a clinician. I have what I've learned through the research and other articles that I've read, but there is a wealth of wisdom and knowledge in that lived experience of people that go through these decisions and these complex life transitions that I wanted to make sure that I was incorporating in the early stages of how we even think about framing this research question. And then the part that I'm going to talk about today is the other study goal, which was to co-create a study to investigate a driving decisions in dementia clinical workflow or clinical care model. The goal of this was to think about before we even get into what does that model look like and start testing it, how do we want to think about framing those research questions, who we invite to participate in that research, and how we measure success beyond just how I think about it and how we've established that in the research literature. What is the expertise of people that live this every day? And so to do that, we set up 2 advisory boards, one made up of clinical team members, doctors, nurses, social workers across practices in Wisconsin, and one made up of community members. So care partners of people with dementia who had gone through a driving transition, and even a few people with dementia themselves. But Barb mentioned in my introduction as well that my background in my research training before I started in my faculty position last year was in multivariable statistical modeling, quantitative methods. So looking at numbers from data that people have already collected and trying to make sense of that in a way that is interesting and meaningful, which I found very valuable. But this was a new skill set for me. So I wanted to phone a friend and get some support in that process. And so as part of my pilot award, I reached out to the Wisconsin Network for Research Support, winners, which Kat will be talking a little bit about her role. And I also see that Kim Neuschel is on the call today too, who's been an invaluable support member on this project as well. And I reached out to the Community Academic Aging Research Network, which Durana will be talking about her role with that as one of their community research associates. And then Mia Croyle, who's also listening in on the call today, I think I saw, was another integral member of our team there. So together we recruited these advisory boards. We have had almost all 4 of our studies. So our community group, we've had our last meeting of the advisory board yesterday. Our clinical group is meeting next week. And we went through a process of trying to, again, think about how do we co-create that study design. Next slide. I'll just share briefly, and we can actually advance through I forgot there were animations on this. Just a couple of the slides that I shared with the advisory board at various parts throughout this work to share, again, how we're thinking about the goals for this next study. So again, we're trying to co-create how do we really get at this process of learning about people's readiness for this transition to non-driving, refining an intervention, and really what we wanted to get that expertise in from the community and clinical team members was how do we test that? How do we put that into practice in a clinical setting? How do we make sure that we're asking the right questions, that we've got the right frameworks, and that we are inviting the right people to come into that process and get that perspective that will help really broaden the impact of this work. That was really important to me through this process. Next slide. Early on in the process, I also wanted to share with the advisory board members what was my reason for studying driving and dementia. And so I shared both personal and professional reasons, ranging from my grandmother's experience with dementia and my personal experience of moving around through the communities that I've lived in the Midwest, as well as what I've learned from the research and how that's built to the research questions that I have now. Next slide. But over the course of our 4 meetings together, again, we went through a process of co-creation where we really started at a very zoomed out view of trying to come to some consensus around what are the key problems and what are the priority areas for moving forward when we think about this transition to non-driving for people with dementia. So we had really robust conversations around that. We then talked in our second meeting about recruitment strategies more than anything. How do we invite people to participate in this research in a way that's going to be encouraging, welcoming, and inclusive to them? And in our third meeting, we talked about how will we measure success? How will we know that this intervention that we're hoping to test is going to be making a difference to people, and what are the key parts to study? At this fourth meeting that we just had with the Community Advisory Board yesterday, we talked about how can we share the findings from this pilot project back with the participants and with other community members or community groups. And we also have some potential opportunity to continue with the next phase of this research with some of these same groups too. And then last slide is just a call out to the study support through the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. But I wanted to share as well with the perspectives of how did this process go? What were the experiences of recruiting members and participating in this? So I'm going to pass it over to Dorana and then Judy to share their experiences. And I'll say also that if folks have questions, please add them to the chat or raise hand as we go. We'll have a pause before we pass off to Kat, who will be our last speaker, to go over some questions and then continue on and have some question time at the end as well. So Dorana, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, KJ. Did a great job of explaining what your research is about and why it's important to you. So as KJ mentioned, I am a part of CARN, and I am a CRA, a Community Research Associate for CARN. And what that means is that I help researchers bridge that gap between their research and the community. And so to start off with KJ's research, the first step that had to be done was getting to know KJ and why her research was important to her. So we started there, just finding out if it was going to be a good fit, if this was really something she cared about and she was going to be a good fit for the community. And that came through phone calls, that came through sitting in on meetings with the rest of my team, having conversations after that about the way we actually felt about KJ and her research. After that, and KJ was a good fit, we started making introductions to KJ, and one of the instrumental introductions was to the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute in Milwaukee. So we met with that team via Zoom, and she was able to explain her research and share with them why it was close to her heart, and identify if there were any members that were third parties of them that may be interested in this research. And so Stephanie Houston, who is over the dementia choir in Milwaukee, she was able to help identify some caregivers and some other people she's worked with through her employment that would be good fits. So she gave me a list of names, and by calling those individuals and having conversations with them and learning their stories and their backgrounds and their families, and just asking them, would you be interested in this particular research project? And if so, why? So those conversations carried on over a couple of weeks, just getting to know a couple individuals, and then from there, seeing if it worked out with their schedule, because as we know, caregivers are quite busy. They're not only managing their schedule, they're managing whoever they're caring for schedules, and the nurses that have to come in, or the other medical team that they have to make appointments with, and so forth. So it can be quite challenging to have several meetings spread out over a time period and try to get everyone there at the same time and in a timely fashion. So we went from there. Our first meeting happened to be in person, and that really went well. The people were able to get to know each other. They were able to gel, learn about KJ, and just really start that initial bond of trust and feeling comfortable in talking about their situations. And that's a really, really important part of the research, is having trust so that people feel open enough about their experiences and the people that they're around to take off the filter, to step out of their comfort zones. and share amongst each other. So that way we can learn from the experiences. So after setting up some ground rules and coming up with a schedule, we decided that the next few meetings we would meet virtually not because everyone didn't want to see everyone's gorgeous faces, but because of the weather. We knew we would be in the winter months. So we decided, it was probably best not to have to reschedule any meetings with unpredictable weather. So we met over Zoom the following 3 meetings, and it worked out really well. And with that being said, we had our last meeting this week on yesterday, Thursday. And the group decided to continue having conversations and meeting together and following KJ along the way with wherever this research leads to in the future. So I think we really had some success there, and we're going to continue to have success. We do have Miss Judy Rogers, who is a member of the Community Advisory Board for Driving Decisions, who has agreed to share her story and tell us a little bit about why she chose to join this Community Advisory Board. I'm going to hand it over to Miss Judy Rogers.
Thank you, Dorona. Just tell me to stop anytime if I'm going on too long and whatever. First of all, I want to thank Dorona and all the ones, Kim and Kate, for inviting me, KJ, for inviting me to be a part of the study. I'm so blessed to have been someone that they reached out to help me through this very, very difficult time. My mom is 96 years old, and she is living in an independent living facility. And you may wonder, why is that with a person who has dementia? My mom moved into the independent facility when she was 84 years old, when my dad died at 93. And she felt like she was capable of taking care of herself. There were no signs to me or my brother, as far as we can tell, that she had dementia. And it wasn't until 2018, my mother got lost on her way back from church. She had moved out to Oak Creek at 84 in an independent living facility, and her church was in central Milwaukee. So from 2012 to 2018, she had navigated that with no problems. And then one Sunday I got a call with her crying and just hysterical that she didn't know where she was at. And so me and my niece, my niece jumped in her car, I jumped in my car, and we kind of did a trace trying to figure out the routes that she may have taken from back to central Milwaukee on the way back to Oak Creek. And we found her, and she was just completely broken down. It was then that I realized that something's going on, but I still didn't realize that she had dementia. But what I did tell her is that I would drive her to church from now on every Sunday. So I did that until the pandemic. At the time of the pandemic, like I said, my mom was living in an independent living, and I was still working 8 hours a day. And her facility requested that they stop interacting with each other. So up until then, before the pandemic, I would come after work, sit outside with her and other people in her building. We'd chit chat and whatever. And I noticed my mom wasn't engaging in the conversation as much, but I just thought it was just comfort level. But the pandemic, I think, really changed a lot of things. And I know some of you may say from your own experiences, it was pretty devastating. For someone with dementia, I think it was worse, because they didn't want them to have interaction with each other, even in the building. And I was restricted from coming in the building, but I still came anyway, just so that she would have some contact with me and whatever. But after that event was over, starting in 2021, my mother never got back into going to church. She used to look forward to going to church. She would get up in the morning and get dressed, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward, I think it was then my mom turned 94 and her license came up for renewal. So we went to the eye doctor because she has cataracts real bad. So I didn't expect she would pass the eye test, but I said, you know what, we're gonna go to the eye doctor and get all of that taken care of. Eye doctor said, yep, without surgery, your eyesight is toast. So my mom literally is looking through pinholes. So we went to DMV, and of course she couldn't pass the eye test, which was good because I didn't have to say anything about the dementia because the eye thing was what told them. But I was surprised because DMV at the time said, oh, you're having a problem with your eyesight. And they handed her a form saying, you can go to your doctor and see if they can do anything to your eyesight. But in the meanwhile, you can continue to drive. And I was like, really? They're really going to allow this? And so I was just like, Mom, we already went to the doctor and whatever. After a few more minutes, my mom agreed she didn't want to go through that process. She was going to surrender her license. Unbeknownst to me as well, she had to sign a form saying she was voluntarily surrendering her license. In other words, I didn't know that I couldn't force her. And I literally kept a copy of the form that says her name and her signature saying she has voluntarily surrendered her license. So that was another eye opener that I was blessed enough not to have to go through the trauma of actually taking keys and everything. But then I put into place, how was my mom going to get around now? So in 2022, I went ahead and retired full time. And I started taking my mom to the store and doing everything with her. And then she just got to the point where she didn't want to leave the apartment and stuff at all. So now today, fast forward, I do all the grocery shopping. We're now doing any doctor calls virtual. From time to time, she'll say something like, yeah, the insurance company told me I can't drive anymore. Because that's how she remembers it. Because when we had first put a car in storage at the apartment building, they sent a letter. The insurance company said, remember, you only have storage on this, so don't drive. So she thinks in her mind, the insurance company stopped her from driving. But that was okay. And so that's how, so when the opportunity came about this driving group, I was very interested because even though I had already went through that and she voluntarily surrendered her license, I was thinking in terms of me and other people I knew. I have a brother who's a year older than me, with both of our parents having gone through dementia. My dad went through it as well, and he had a car accident. I'm thinking I want to know more about this and driving because who knows, me or my brother may be at this state in a few more years. And I want to know what it's like, the steps and things that I can do to help others, myself, and whatever, to ease ourselves into that non-driving state. Because as you know, when we stop driving, a lot of us look at it, we're no longer independent. We can't go where we want to go when we want to go. And so I'm grateful to be a part of this group, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Judy.
Yes, thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing. It's so great to have you part of the group. And again, I just really appreciate being able to have these conversations. So we wanted to leave a little moment now to just, that was a lot of the nuts and bolts, or what was the experience, or what led some of the people that were part of this research project to come together. So if this is an opportunity where people have questions, this would be time for some of that now. And then we'll go a little bit more into, again, how does this fit into the research, the co-creation, the co-design. Kat will share with us about that too.
Any questions?
I have a question, Dorona. So I really love the work around figuring out if this is a right fit. Is this investigator a right fit for the community group, or how to think about tailoring connections with community members with an investigator? Where did that process come from? And also, KJ, what was it like for you to think about that getting vetted and really thinking about it in terms of the importance of making sure it's a right fit for the community?
Very good question, Barb. As a CRA, which I've been a CRA for 5 years, and as Karn decided that it wanted to bring on more inner city, urban community partners, African American community partners, we knew that this was going to require some trust building, not only for the community to, the community recognizes who we are, yes, from the community, but they don't know the researcher from Jimmy or Bob. So we had to figure out a way within Karn to vet our researchers. And what we came up with was a similar process that the African American Health Network had when vetting out researchers that came and spoke to them. It was an intake form. So after a researcher met with us and we heard what they had to say about their project, that's all surface level, the project, that's all academics. So we had them fill out an intake form that is based off of some of the questions that we needed to know, some that dug a little deeper instead of just surface questions. For example, have you ever worked with the community in the past? And if so, give us details about your work within the community. Tell us how you are going to maintain a relationship within the community after this research is done. Sustainability, so different questions like that we could comb through and discuss amongst ourselves to decide if that researcher is going to be a good fit to work with Karn. KJ, I think you had part 2 of the question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think in some ways it actually felt reassuring to me. It was funny listening to Dorana describe it now in hindsight. Again, that process was a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. This has been a long time coming to get to this stage of the research. And so hearing it described, I was like, oh, I'm glad that they liked me. I'm glad I met the criteria that it passed along. But as it was happening, as I reflect back on it, that it was validating for why I was taking this step in my research, that this isn't about, I have my own idea that I want to just get out there. Is there someone I can share it with? Is there a group that I can sort of put on the grants that I'm writing as a name of somebody that I'm connecting with? But that I really did want to learn and connect with a group that was interested in this project and that it was a good fit. And so that matchmaking piece of it felt really important to, again, what was motivating me to reach out and try to build skills in this and build relationships with partners and experts outside of the academic experience. I think too, I think about it as it's very easy in academia to get caught up in scientific language and the currency of what we do in our research and papers and publications and grants. And that is all important too, because it allows this work to happen, but none of that is the reason why I started doing research. It was because I wanted to answer questions in a way that was going to help people. And so sort of reflecting back on that and keeping that sort of central throughout the process of what I'm doing, it felt reassuring to know that there was effort and thought being put into making a good match or a good fit between me and groups that I might work with.
And one of the things that really stood out about KJ is as we provided opportunities for her to engage with the community, I cannot recall one time when KJ said, no, I can't make it. She stepped out of her comfort zone. She went to events that she knew no one at, just to engage. And more importantly, that there was no ask. She was just attending the events to find out more about the community, get engaged with the community. So people saw, who she was, and she was able to get a feel for what the community was like, and that way she was invited to other opportunities and they were able to see her face. And then when, her research did come up that, hey, if anyone is interested in this, she wasn't a stranger to the community.
From my perspective, those events were all really rewarding and fun to go to. In particular, one of the community events that I've really enjoyed getting to connect more with over the process of developing these relationships is the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute's Amazing Grace Dementia Chorus, which is a choir made up of people with dementia and care partners and people who've had experience with dementia. And it is such a beautiful social gathering opportunity. You know, at every concert and event, the audience is invited to sing along, and it's truly lovely. And out of that, now I've been invited to come give a talk about you know, my expertise, what I know about driving and dementia, to the group at one of their in-services later this spring. So it feels nice to again to try to take it slow and make these connections naturally rather than forcing them.
Question for you, KJ. One comment is I'm really happy with the way you structured the meetings with community and the clinical partner, because there's a lot of intentionality in every meeting that you designed. And I'm curious about the meeting where you had to share results. Like, what, from a research perspective, the way we have results is very different from what a community would like to see. So how did you navigate that aspect of sharing your results with the community?
That's a great question. And I think it gets back to one of the comments I made too about phoning a friend in this process. So how we prepared for that section actually came a lot from the insights of the Wisconsin Network for Research Support. So from Kat Phelps and Kim Neuschel, along with Durana. You know, I had put together sort of a draft of what I thought might be a useful way to share some of the results that we'd been learning, particularly from the interviews. I was thinking, you know, how do we take what we've learned from one side and share it with the other? And with that starting point, we then had an iterative process before we even got to the advisory group meeting with Miss Judy and others yesterday, where we went through a process of trying to refine and put together, you know, is it a handout? Is it a brochure? What's the information that's important to share? So I think this is one of those areas where, again, each person brings their own strengths to this process of research, and certainly to co-creation and working with community partners. And so having team members that you can work with and collaborate with who have that expertise in getting outside of that academic language. There were certainly, you know, in the discussion that we had yesterday about the, you know, sharing results, even after having gone through that process with Kat and Kim and Durana and Mia of getting that feedback about what we'd prepared, there were still parts that were, you know, we were still using $1,000 words where we could have used a $1 word, and we got really great insight from the advisory board. So that was a meeting that was particularly, I mean, I can't pick a favorite meeting because we learned a lot of really valuable information every time we had a conversation with our boards.
I just want to add to that, if I can, is that at yesterday's meeting, one of our fellow participants just pointed out a fact that the color and the font was readable for people with older age. You know, it's the little things like that that sometimes we're all in a group and we're so immersed in looking at the language, we forget about the little things that'll make a person not even read the brochure because their eyesight doesn't allow that color to filter in or whatever. So that was a good observation. So yeah, coming together in a group is just, it's dynamic with how people see little things so differently. So, and I appreciate that so much. Takes me out of my little world.
Thanks, Ms. Judy. The other piece I want to share too, as I'm just thinking about resources that were helpful in this process, is early on in the development of, you know, the interview guide or even our first slides that we shared with the community advisory board. I also worked with the, oh, I'm terrible with acronyms. So Kat, I may punt it to you, with CARDS, which is the
Community Advisors on Research Design and Strategy.
Thank you. Thank you. You'll notice that the name that I came up with for my intervention is not necessarily an acronym, although other people are pressuring me to call it the D3, but then I'm never going to remember what the D stand for. I mean, I probably will because it's my research, but anyways. So CARDS was an incredibly useful group, which is a standing advisory board that comes together and is available to give feedback to researchers at the UW about the work that they're doing and how it might be received by community members or target groups. And they also did a great job of giving feedback on the font, the color, the layout. So again, there are a lot of important parts of how we share what we're finding beyond even language, how it's presented visually, which is not necessarily where I feel like I have the strongest skills on my own, but as a team and working with others, it's a great opportunity to build that.
So I will, if it's all right, move us into the last part, because everything we just talked about really focused on the term co and co-creation, co-design. We wanted to model this presentation off principles that we hold, which include that lived experience, people who are closest to the issues that are being studied. Judy's experience with her mom is centered in KJ's study of what it is like to retire from driving. And so having Judy share her story and having that be upfront was intentional in the presentation, and that it's relationship first, that this work and the way that Durana and Karen and Winners work collaboratively is to encourage deep, sustained relationship with the people you're centering their lived experiences. So I'm going to end with actually the driest part. So sorry, all the fun has happened already. But again, it is really important when you decide to do community engaged work to understand principles that are driving the how of what you do in your work. So I'm just going to talk a little bit again, as I mentioned, about this prefix co, and what co-design and co-creation look like, and why it's different maybe than the design process. Would you go to the next slide, Kathy? And then we're going to stay there for a little while. But there are a lot of words that are used and have actually variations of meaning. On the process side, there's co-design, participatory design, user-centered design, human-centered design, co-creation. All these kind of morph and get used in similar ways in similar places. But I want to talk a little bit about some differences. And then the who gets involved in the process. Sometimes people are called the users or end users, stakeholders, experts, co-designers, community members. The who has different words, and again, those words have different meanings that I want to parse a little bit about. I want to start with the term design, because this all is grounded in design thinking. And design thinking is a non-linear, iterative process that teams use to understand the people who use innovations, they challenge the assumptions, they redefine problems, and create solutions to prototype and test. So it's most useful to use a design process for ill-defined or difficult, challenging problems that we sometimes call wicked problems, problems that are really unique and that you can't apply one solution across the board. Stanford University's Hassel-Plattner at the Institute of Design, commonly known as the D School, is renowned for its pioneering approach to design thinking. So their design process, you've probably seen the little hexagons that are the 5 phases of empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So those stages are not always sequential. Teams often run them in parallel, out of order, and repeat them as needed. But it's important to know, even if you know that set of design thinking as a model, there's actually no single definition or process for design thinking. That 5-stage design thinking methodology I just mentioned is one of several frameworks, and global design leaders and consultants have iterated on that abstract design process in different ways and have proposed other frameworks of design thinking. I want to mention 3 that I think are interesting. You can check them out on your own at another time, but there's the head, heart, and hand approach. that's by the American Institute of Graphic Arts, and it's kind of a holistic perspective on design, and it integrates the sort of intellectual head, emotional, and practical aspects of the creative process. So head symbolizes the intellectual component, heart represents the emotional dimension, and then hand signifies that practical execution of ideas and the skills necessary to turn concepts into tangible solutions. So that's one. Also a common group is called IDEO. It's a leading design consultancy that's developed its own version of design thinking framework. And they use the stages of inspire, ideate, and implement. And in the inspire phase, the team focuses on understanding the end user's needs, behaviors, and motivations. In the ideate phase, the team synthesizes the insights gained to brainstorm a wide array of solutions. And then in the implement phase, the team brings those ideas to life through prototypes. And then the third one that you've also probably heard of or seen is called the Double Diamond by the Design Council. And a Hungarian, which I'm half Hungarian, so I got really excited when I learned it was a Hungarian, named Béla Banathi, who was at San Jose State, created what's called the divergence-convergence model diagram. I'll show it in a minute. But the British Design Council interpreted this diagram to create the double diamond design process model. And as the name suggests, the double diamond model consists of two diamonds, one for the problem space and the other for the solution space. So first you discover by gathering insights, it's very divergent to learn about what is needed by the end user. And then you start defining the problem, which is convergent. And then in the solution space, you do the same thing where you develop, team brainstorms ideas, and then you converge on delivering, where you think about implementing. All these design processes, while they're quite different, have some really similar elements. You start with empathy. You don't rush into a solution, but you generate a lot of information and gather before you even identify exactly what the problem is. You use this divergent and convergent to first learn a lot and then narrow down. And you iterate. You listen, learn, change, listen, and learn. All right. So why co? What is the difference between the design process and a co-design or a co-create? In the design process, it became apparent quickly that the experts were considered the designers. The designers controlled the process. They decided who came to the table to participate in the process. They were the synthesizers who took the information and made decisions along the way of the process. And that did not speak to a value of lived experience and equity being honored within the process. That spoke to, we prioritize book learning, expertise as defined by knowledge learned in institutes of higher education, and not equal footing or even elevating the footing of people who are living with the challenges that we're trying to create solutions collaboratively for. So the co came about. Next slide now. Sorry, that was a long time on that slide. The others will move much quicker. The co came about when people started valuing what centering voices really meant. And centering voices, this is a nice description. I won't read it. I'll just be quiet for a moment. Centering voices means you don't just one time ask people to share their experience and then move ahead with all the other steps of designing and implementing. You allow and support leadership and continued involvement in a team that co-creates, co-designs. So Next slide, please. Co-design is this intentional and ongoing process. Each step in the process is planned according to the results of the last one, and it keeps centering over and over the voices of people who are the experts in what actually are the challenges being studied. Next slide. This is that double diamond model that I talked about, and what is also true between the terms design and create is that co-design and the design process is really quite limited to those steps of defining the problem all the way to developing a possible solution, but it hasn't really broadened to understanding the context before you even think about which problems you're considering, or moving through to the end, the implementation, dissemination phases of how you get it out. So the design window is a more narrow window than the word creation and what co-creation looks like. Co-creation is broader than co-design and is really all of the various stages, including dissemination and implementation at the end. You see here, this context was added as a really important part at the front end before you do these divergent and convergent steps that don't jump to solutions before all this problem space is explored. And I just want to credit KJ for really starting with the first meetings being the problem space. There were not meetings that involved, what's the problem? Let's get to the solution. There were lots of discussions of, what does this feel like? What does this look like? What does this sound like? For people who are living with loved ones with dementia, who are driving, not driving, in between those different steps of retiring from driving. Next slide, please. I just want to end with this version, which is a 2021 paper that came out that was really focused on how innovations in healthcare might be limited in moving from studies to practice because we have not been focusing on the pre-design and post-design stages. So what they did is add steps in the design process that really highlight the work that needs to be done early on to get to a solid design process, and the work that needs to be done after the design process in post-design to continue out again through that implementation and dissemination. So just to know that both the co and creation are really important transformations from what original design thinking has offered us. And not to say there isn't still lots of value in all the design thinking. And there have been really nice innovations to center community voice and to broaden it beyond the specific design thinking stages. So thanks, told you it would be drier. It was gonna be drier. This is the final slide here. This is a National Academy of Medicine model where I just want to point out their newly shared model of achieving health equity and systems transformation centers community engagement and community voice. So they are uplifting this idea of co and broadening a design framework to really transform the stage and move the needle on health equity. Thanks, everyone. I think our idea was to have one more session of questions, sharing, and if it's not just questions, something you do in your work that relates to something you've heard today would be really nice. Everybody on this call is really engaged in involving a broader spectrum of people and contributors to their work. And we know your experiences would be really great to add to this conversation. So even if it's not a question, if you'd be willing to share something that resonated with you or something you've done, that would be appreciated.
I'll just jump in to call out or echo something, Kat, that I thought you brought up really well in this part of the presentation and discussed at length, this idea that co-creation or co-design involves not knowing what the solution is going to look like when you get started. And to acknowledge that from an academic researcher's perspective, that can feel really uncomfortable sometimes. It can be really difficult to write about that in a grant proposal, for example, to say, I'm requesting funding to study something, and I don't quite know what it is yet, but that there's this, that it is still very important, intuitively as a person, as a user, as a clinician, it makes sense that, of course, we don't have the answer. And of course, it's going to look different as we go through this process. But that it's so helpful to think about these frameworks and the fact that this is not a new idea. I find it, it really resonates with me every time I hear about co-design, because, I mean, again, of course, as we work through trying to put this together and put it into practice, we're going to learn things about it and it's going to change. We don't know now what we're going to know in the future. But to write that in a way that is appealing to a funder can sometimes feel challenging and overwhelming. And so just this reminder of the, the frameworks and the history behind this. This is not a new idea. There is a lot that goes into how do we support this work.
Jasper, pop on.
Hi guys, great talk. I was actually getting my steps in while you were talking, so really appreciate the talk. As an anthropologist, I love co-design and I love what you've done with your project today. And the stuff at the end was not dry. That stuff is bread and butter. That's great. I really just wanted to offer some praise and maybe remind the group that there's so many names for this kind of stuff. And one of my favorite ones is it's called looping. So if you look up Kim Fortune, she's an anthropologist at UC Irvine, and there's a term also related to it called discursive risk analysis. And it's this idea of building long-term relationships with environments and the communities within those environments to mitigate risk. And so I think listening to the talk, in terms of health, this is so applicable to so many different kinds of research. So again, just offering some kudos, some parallels in a different discipline, but great work.
Thanks, Cap. Ooh, we'll just put a question in chat. For all the speakers, what's one piece of advice you have for researchers who are new to Madison or to community engaged research or co-design work? Judy, would you be willing to kick us off?
Wow. Wow. So from a community side is, I would think being able to listen with the right kind of ear. I don't know how to say that. The academics that we had leading us were so receptive to our explanation and where we were in our journey. They didn't attempt to steer us any direction or guide us any way in a negative way, but to more or less listen and try to help us put into words what we were experiencing. And because of that, we felt more comfortable at sharing information. So it was a really safe space. And that's very important. I know it was for me, and some of the other participants said it as well, because we're sharing ideas that we don't know how we got here. We just know we have a loved one that we're trying to take care of. And when we share something, we need people to listen, just like my mom needs me to listen to her with her dementia, you know. So I think the most important things for you researchers is to understand that, yes, while you have this academic cap up here, sometimes you have to like just listen to us community people from where we're coming from, and then take it into stride of how you can use it in your research.
I would say, don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone, and enter, you know, a space that you're unfamiliar with, just to get to know people. I know it's difficult for us all to do, no matter what environment we're in. But, you know, the easiest way to get to know someone is to share your experience and just to say hello, you know, and sometimes, well, a lot of times it's going to be uncomfortable, but you have to start somewhere. And that's the best place to start.
Add that you don't have to start alone, and you probably shouldn't. There are a lot of great resources here at this university to help build on that. I felt so lucky to get to work with Winners and Karn and people who have been doing this work and have been putting so much thought into how to make these connections, and so having that guidance and being able to connect with people that have that expertise is really valuable. So just ask, you know, the people that you work with, the people in your department, if you're new, if you're getting started, you might not know where the resources are. It's a big university, which is an advantage, and also can be really overwhelming and difficult when you're starting to learn and navigate resources. But just start asking and be honest and humble about what it is that you're hoping to accomplish, because the help will be very, very useful along the way.
With 2 minutes remaining, I want to join you in helping me thank this amazing panel of presenters today for the DRISS Presents TEACH-RS seminar series. You see the link in chat about our survey. Please complete that, and we will bug you again if you haven't completed it. This is really important information that really helps us shape what the seminar series needs to look like to really benefit individuals who are going to participate. So with that, with like 30 seconds left, I want to thank Dr. Phelps and Dr. Hansmann and Durana and Judy for being here with us for this hour. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. This was great.